Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a matter of unconcealed pleasure and privilege to have had the opportunity this evening. You know, when we were very young, we were very envious of Rotary because growing up with my father, I was very young when he passed away. So I usually found him in one of two places. He was either in office or at Rotary. So as little kids, we were extremely envious that what kind of animal this Rotary was that took our father away from us as often as it did. I did confess to one of you over here that I was conscripted as an honorary Rotarian quite a few years ago, and I hold the unblemished record of never ever having been to a meeting. So I'm holding on to that clean slate as of this evening. You see, the invitation, it was, I was absolutely overjoyed with the invitation. And it was a very political invitation because it came in two parts. Shorbani called me up and I said that, we want you to speak in a Rotary meeting, etc. So I said, look, great opportunity, let me seize it. And then I asked her, what do you want me to speak about? So she told me very frankly, very nonchalantly, you don't really know much about anything else, so why don't we hang around the heart and things like that? So I said, fair enough, that's a pretty honest kind of statement. And then a few days later, she tells me that, we heart tat niye bolbe, but remember it has something to do with peace, because, we have, so I thought for a while, and I said, I've heard of many kind of, heart attacks, heart problems, but so far I've not heard of a peaceful heart attack so far. So that really, my already overstretched cerebral capacity was working full steam. But anyway, I'll try to fulfill both the criteria laid down by Shorbani. A, stick to something I presume I probably know a little bit about, and then try not to make the atmosphere very unpeaceful this evening, because I think we have enough strife all around us, more than we've catered for. So once again, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thinking about, peace and health and things like that, so on being cerebrally instigated by Shorbani, I was looking through that what the United Nations been up to recently. So a gentleman I've not really been a great fan of in my life, which is in his role as the chief of WHO, Ghebreyesus, who made a mess of the COVID campaign. He's actually come up with this formulation, which doesn't sound too bad, which is peace for health and health for peace. There is a different perspective to this. And looking back, if you journey through the times, you will find out that the world has really been at its most turbulent within the last half a century of now, in a quest for peace. When peace was in the air, over the period of a short period of 3 decades, the world had lapsed into two of the bloodiest wars seen by modern human civilization, in form of the World War I and the World War II, 1914 to 1918, and then of course 1939 to 1945. As we thought that, we were coming to terms, the dust was settling, enough bombs have been dropped and enough bullets have been fired, roughly in the period of time from the late 30s to the early 40s, as the threat of the war abated, a new threat emerged. There were enough people. There were millions of youngsters dying all over Europe, all over the battlefields, from Somme to Berlin, being a victim of unmitigated violence. But as the violence abated, a new threat emerged. We didn't really have neither the time nor the inclination to look into these things. And the threat of heart disease or cardiovascular problems really emerged and came onto its own in that era. Why did we not know? Why were we not really as concerned about it before? Well, first and foremost, it's common sense. People were not really living long enough. If you had 26-year-old, the median age of people who died in the two world wars was not even 30 years. If you were pumping bullets through people before they were 30 years of age, how many of them were at all living long enough to have heart disease, lifestyle disease manifest is the first question. The second was, in the period, especially in North America and in Europe, they really emerged from a decade of serious food and serious nutritional rationing. People, it's like having a splurge. So people really splurged out after the World War. Suddenly you had chocolates, you had sugar, you had bread, you had rice. You could eat again. You could live like a normal human being again, which was really unknown for almost a period of a decade. And this, which we will refer to quite a few times in our conversation, this really saw the rise of lifestyle diseases, and waving the flag of lifestyle diseases was the present demon in the shape of diabetes. And remember, in that era, today it is so unfashionable to smoke. Everybody, don't smoke, you have all these warnings. It was exactly in this time, in the Second World War and in the First World War, that we were actively encouraging smoking. Every soldier who enrolled in the two world wars, especially the Second World War, was sent by the government a welcome pack, and that included, you were welcomed into the army with 500 cigarettes. Because that was considered to be Horlicks and smoke. It was considered to be not only very macho, it was supposed to be good for health, lift your energy, makes you run faster, fight harder. So this was an era when war ended in one form and the devil raised its head in yet another. Now, whatever happens in the so-called West, we take our time in our part of the world to catch up with it. Remember, we are not talking about India of today, when there was no internet, no MTV, nothing. We were in the decades of the 40s and 50s. And we, tucked away in one corner of Southeast Asia, we took about 5 decades to catch up with the rest of the world. And as of today, where we live, we have undergone a transformation. And in this transformation, commonest cause of death, the other day, some news channel came to interview me and said, thankfully, thanks to Sandesh Khali and the political outfits of Bengal, COVID has been ably replaced by another nuisance around. But there are some journalists who are really missing COVID. And they asked me, sir, have you heard 3 people have died yesterday? So I reminded the young person that in India, on an average 24-hour cycle, 45,000 people die in India every 24 hours. And that is normal. For a population of 1.4 billion, that is normal. And of that, currently, more than 1/3 of the deaths in our country is no longer from communicable diseases. It is from cardiovascular diseases. So it has now in India, and this change has probably happened in the last 2 decades, that it is the commonest threat to life over here. And look at the graph on your right-hand side. It shows you 2 things. One is, over a period of time, how the proportion of death from heart problems have risen. And the second, the blue and the red represent one thing, how the women's equality is catching up, because the women are fast catching up with men, and the gender bias on the gender difference in this problem is fast closing. Now, as the internal peace in us was being shattered, that even though there weren't bombs being dropped and bullets being fired, we saw in our society 2 diametrical happenings. One is, we saw a rapid decrease in communicable diseases. Communicable diseases like infection, malaria, cholera, etc. That was, and especially after independence, when government was a little bit attentive, at least in the cities, on sanitation, water supply. So you didn't have people, dying by the hundreds and thousands of communicable diseases. But as communicable diseases waned, lifestyle diseases, chronic conditions like heart diseases galloped. And what really concerns us today is the incidence in the young age. 10% of all deaths from cardiac conditions are sudden deaths. People never realized they've ever had this problem before. And again, repeatedly we'll refer to this very nationalistic disease called the incidence of diabetes. Now, if you look at what happens really inside the human circulation, I'm sure not many of you were unfortunate enough as we were to revise human physiology and human biology repeatedly in our lives. But what happens really is that about 70 to 80 times a minute, this 300 grams muscular organ goes on beating inside our chest. We think of the heart as a pump. Actually, heart is not a pump, heart is two pumps. It is two pumps. And because the Almighty ran out of space inside the chest, he or she fused two pumps across a muscle mass. So the heart is actually two pumps working in parallel. And there are few things to keep in mind, that it is concerned with blood flow. And for this, how many heartbeats do you have in 24 hours? You have about 100,000 heartbeats in 24 hours. By the time you're about 60 years of age, your heart has beaten 300 crore heartbeats, a massive amount of energy, and free of cost. There was no recharging. There was no center to visit. There were no type A, type B USBs you needed to recharge the heart when you get to sleep. And literally the only organ of the human body that from birth to death never knows a second of rest. Every other muscle, skeletal muscle, gastrointestinal, even the brain has a period of low activity. But nature was merciless on the cardiovascular system. You had this little fellow pumping out through 64,000 kilometers of blood vessels we have in our body. So if every single blood vessel was laid end to end of our body, it will basically go around the world 3 times. So the next time you are looking for a cheap ticket around the world, look at your arteries and think you've had all this circuitry done, plumbed in for free. Now this fantastic device of nature, evolution of the heart is in itself a wonderful subject, but it will take hours to dwell on it. But this great marvel of creation, it took us a jolly long time to understand it. I'll tell you the story in a minute or two. At the moment, we are faced with 2 principal concerns. Fantastic, great piece of machinery, works on natural energy, free of cost, 100,000 heartbeats a day. But at the moment, we are worried about 2 big problems. And one big problem is obviously the very familiar problem of people getting these heart attacks, infarction, angina, etc. And the second problem, we must learn the very simple basics of differentiating between these 2 different categories of problems. And the other problem is what we call heart failure. How are they different? You see, nature was very clever with us. And sometimes I think nature was more cleverer than was necessary. You look at the little bird. Have you seen a hummingbird on your window? It's the most metabolically energetic organism that nature has ever produced, the little bird. For the metabolic rate, the amount of work the little bird's heart does is fantastic. Look at the mammoth amphibians, the crocodiles, etc. I had a photo of the shark's heart. I'll show you someday. Enormous, few tons. So right up to the fishes, to the reptilian heart, nature did something. I think nature got bored of it. The heart had no arteries. It had a lot of muscle, pumping all the time. But how did the heart work? It had blood in the cavity, and like a sponge soaks of water, the heart muscle would soak up its own blood from the cavity. Life was peaceful. And then God, nature, whoever it was, thought that, look, this is not clever enough. Now the next edition I'm making, Homo sapiens 2.0 or 3.0, this software has to be upgraded. And there starts the problem. So God did not consult either Sony, Apple, Amazon, whoever, and committed a single biggest blunder, which was it started supplying the human heart muscles with pipes or arteries. So it was from the mammalian heart that for the first time you see these pipes coming inside the human heart. I think God was very happy with his brilliant piece of work. God had not heard of Haldiram, God had not heard of Dalda, God had not heard of Charminar and ITC in those days. And single biggest innovation of nature went against the fate of humanity as we know it now. So you see, the basic problem we are facing over here is like dirt or garbage accumulating in your pipes. And we need a certain amount of blood flow. When we were born, all the arteries were spick and span and clean like the one over here. And as time goes on, a lot of changes happen, and a combination of lot of things. We will come to cholesterol in a minute, but what happens is, so basically the problem with ischemic basically means lack of blood supply. So the problem that we are facing right now is that these small arteries, now I don't have much hair on my head, but some of you do. So how big, when you talk about arteries of the heart, like today I've probably plumbed 3 hearts or 4 hearts by the afternoon. So how big is an artery of the heart? If you put 5 of your hairs together side by side, 4 to 5, that is how wide an artery of the heart is. So the diameter is around 1.5 millimeters to 1. That is what we stitch for a living. That's how I put bread on my plate. So this is how big these little arteries are. And in no time, for a variety of reasons, these tubes gets blocked. And whenever we think of the heart, we think of, yes, it has muscle. Of course it has muscle. Without a muscle, the heart wouldn't beat. What is a heart muscle? It was Leonardo da Vinci who first taught us that heart muscle is actually you making what is called Romali roti. You go to Armenia or somewhere. So the heart muscle is actually, the next time you visit Armenia or Sabi somewhere, you see a big Romali roti being made. Heart muscle is actually one sheet. And that one sheet, if it is wound around itself about 6 to 7 times very carefully, you produce this heart muscle with 4 chambers, etc., etc. And what is most amazing about the heart pumping is that you won't lift your right hand or left hand without you wishing it, that yes, I want to lift up my hand. But nobody asks the heart to work, right? So the heart goes on walking. It is like a Chinese circuitry going inside repeatedly. It's a self-repetitive circuit. And without you ever in your life consciously asking this little 300 grams piece of muscle to work, it's going on, work it on its own repeatedly. But the problem, I hope you never have to. If you hold a heart in your hand, how thick is a heart muscle? A heart muscle is basically if you have one of these normal pieces of toast in the morning. So the pumping chamber of the heart is equal to 1.5 slices of toast. That is how thick it is. It is a pretty thick muscle. And this thick muscle is being constantly supplied by blood. And the problem arises when we run into problem with the blood supplying to the heart, because the once clean pipes that we had, with all the depositions and thing by the side, this deposition builds up, and there comes one fateful hour when it either blocks the complete channel, and hence beyond the pipeline we have no supply whatsoever. Now, with time, we have learned one more thing, and this is very critical when we say 10% of all cardiac problems are sudden. Why are 10% of all cardiac problems sudden? Because we may be carrying a few sort of depositions, plaques here and there, but abruptly you do have moments when these plaques, it's like a boil in your skin that decides to rupture. It's like an abscess rupturing. You have these abrupt plaque ruptures, and this is something that accounts for these sudden unwarranted heart issues. How do we treat it? This problem. How many of us, I haven't counted the audience today, basically in India, if you have 100 people, 40 and above, sitting in a gathering, to me, what does 100 people sitting in an audience mean? 100 people in an audience sitting in an audience means you have 40 diabetics, you have about 30 to 35 hypertensives, and you have 40 to and about 25 of them knowingly or unknowingly are carrying the stigma of heart disease in their chest. So, in the Indian ecosystem today, what is the current incidence? It's about 20% plus in males, and women are not too far behind. They have long crossed the double digits. They are somewhere around 14 to 15%. So that is how common it is. How do we treat it? Now, treatment, please, do not be very apprehensive of the cardiologist or the heart surgeon whenever you see one. We are not cutting up people and doing fancy tests all the time. 80% of all problems are managed on medicines. Medicines are very good. If you have some finance people amongst you, it's a very simple demand-supply equation. The heart needs, say, 100 milliliters of blood. You have some issues. Your deficiency is only 20%. You are being supplied 80. In that setting, medicines will work perfectly well. So about more than 3/4 of all people who have some amount of chest discomfort are managed on medicine. But when we cannot, it is only when the demand supply, it is the applied form of health economics, that when the demand supply deficit has become more severe, it is only then we recourse to treatments like angioplasty, surgery, etc. How did we detect heart disease? You see this gentleman on the right-hand side. This gentleman, I used to work for a couple of years in a hospital in the middle of London, St. Mary's in Paddington. So St. Mary's, it was an old hospital with new extensions. There were 2 rooms in St. Mary's which was never used subsequently. One was the room where Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, 1929. He came back from holiday, opened his window, saw some fungus, and that was the start of penicillin. And the other was the room where the first ECG was done. And the first ECG machine was even bigger than the machine you saw over here. You wanted to have an ECG done, you would go and spend one whole day in a hospital. The first ECG machine was huge. It was like a big safe. And later on, you see, we learn today that what does an ECG really tell us? What is the gibberish that a doctor sees in an ECG? Because the heart is pumping, there is electrical activity. So an ECG is no different from an electrician getting to your home and checking the voltages. It is just picking up differences in action potentials through different parts, because heart is the only electrically active organ in this part of the body. We were not happy with the ECG alone. We wanted to know from outside what is happening to the structures inside. ECG gave us a rough idea. Does it look normal? Are any of the big moving parts of the heart defective? We had no idea till you cut up somebody and saw it from the inside. And there was a clever man. I think some of you would have gone to Salzburg. So when I was in Salzburg last, people were spending hours admiring the house of Mozart, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, that's where he lived. Poor Mozart spent half his life on the road. He died before he was, I think, 34 years of age, and half the time was spent in traveling up and down between Vienna and Salzburg. And living 3 houses away from Salzburg, from Mozart, was this gentleman called Christian Doppler. And anybody who's in Salzburg, like anybody who's in Calcutta is inspired by Satyajit Roy. So anybody who's in Salzburg is inspired by Mozart. And this is one of the pupils of Mozart, Christian Doppler, who said that, look, music is not just sound, it is vibrations. And later on, he came up with a theory. We have Dr. Sharma sitting in front of us, if I'm not mistaken, one of the first pioneers of ultrasound and echocardiography. So, sir, this is a man who did the trick a few years, quite a few years before you did. So it was Christian Doppler. That is why, we use the term, go to the thing, get an echo Doppler done. I've asked a lot of doctors, why do you call it echo Doppler? Who was Doppler? So this chap is Doppler, who lived 3 houses away from Mozart. And with the inspiration of classical music, it dawned on him that we can use sound waves as vibration. And when it reflects back, the pictures can actually be captured. We were talking about smoking a few minutes ago, how bad smoking was. So this gentleman you see on the right-hand side, this is a story in the year 1957 in Cleveland Clinic. So by the time people have some idea what the heart trouble and all that is about, but we were struggling really hard. How the hell do you detect it? How was myocardial infarction generally diagnosed? How was it diagnosed? At postmortems. Brilliant. You wrote a lot of papers on it, but no good for the man who's already a corpse on the table. So as we were banging our heads on the wall, how to diagnose these blockages inside the heart, people at that time was taking pictures inside heart cavities. We had no idea how to enter the artery of the heart. And we had Dr. Soanes in Cleveland Clinic, one of the big chaps of cardiologists those days. He only had one problem. He had to smoke every 15 minutes. So he was doing a test in the area we call a cath lab. And he got, he had some cases to do. He had to smoke the next one. So he left the cath lab. And he asked his junior, you fellow come, you do this test, I'll come back. He went for he went for a smoke outside. By the time he came back, that 20-year-old patient on the table had a cardiac arrest. People were thumping and banging on his chest. This young doctor who did the investigation got a mouthful from all his seniors. He would have lost his job. And later on at night, when they all sat back to review the films, what actually had gone wrong in the cath lab, they realized it is for the first time that by utter mistake that somebody had taken a picture of a coronary artery. And this boy, who would have been, lost his job or something, being suspended by sheer accident. So this is the picture of the first coronary angiogram ever done in 1957, which was a total fluke, because we had no idea prior to that how you could ever do an angiogram. And right now, you see, doing angiograms is a cornerstone of diagnosis today, how we diagnose heart disease. The cornerstone, the fundamental. And we have an even better modality today. That better modality today is called a CT angiogram, where you don't even need to go and get admitted in a hospital. You can do a CT scan and get it diagnosed. A quick word, we don't want to bore you with operations and things like that, but I like these little stories that accompany the history of cardiology. So by sheer accident, in Cleveland Clinic in 1957, we had got to diagnose. Now you could take pictures of the heart. You could tell people, look, your artery number 1 is blocked, 2 is blocked, 3 is blocked. Brilliant, well done. Then what do you do with it? You have the information, you know where the problem is. But what is the solution? For years and years of years, the solution was eluding us. Till one postgraduate trainee in the, once again in the Cleveland Clinic, Rene Favaloro, he came up with the idea that just like if I plumb a piece of a blood vessel beyond the blockages, I can restore the blood supply. And through the work of this postgraduate trainee, he had not even been qualified then, he discovered in 1967 the first coronary bypass was done, and that was the inspiration of a young doctor in an operation theater. After that, something more miraculous happened. There was a chap sitting in Switzerland, and in Switzerland, you could diagnose some blocks in the world at that era, and you could do something. But everybody was needing to have an operation for that. And this cardiologist saw something that his wife was trying to clean a blocked sink, pushing a pipe in and taking a pipe out, putting a rubber pipe in, taking a pipe out. And not very often do people get inspired by their wives, but that was a great exception. That this fellow in Switzerland, his name was Andreas Brunswick, he said, look, if my wife can do that to the kitchen sink, why can't I do that to the heart? So he goes back to the table. So being greatly inspired by a kitchen sink being open, comes in front of us one of the most revolutionary technologies of medicine in today's era, which was coronary angioplasty. And if you look at the coronary bypass angioplasty put together in the world, coronary bypass is the single most popular operation ever done in human history, ever done. There have been more coronary bypasses done than appendicectomies in the world. And what coronary bypass did was, prior to us doing coronary bypasses, not us but our pioneers, people had this rule of 5 in medicine. You have a treatment, you were alive for 5 years, you were considered greatly lucky. Go home, celebrate, you are alive for 5 years after treatment. Coronary bypass changed that paradigm. It started producing results for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So the whole idea of long-term follow-up changed. Medicines equally effective. Today, if you consider the whole world, about 10 million, 1 crore cardiac procedures get done every year worldwide. And in India, currently we are doing about 10 lakhs. India is 10% of the world. We do about 10 lakh cardiac procedure. And God willing, this year, we will overtake United States as the single biggest coronary procedure performing country in the world this year. So much so for bypasses. Now what is happening when the heart muscle, great work of nature, etc., what happens when that muscle starts getting weak and lax? That is simply heart failure. So you hear doctors saying, oh, your heart, I'm worried, bhalak echo doesn't look very good, your heart is weak. So when the pumping function of the heart is weak, that is heart failure. For a variety of reasons, it is happening today, 2% of the adult population. And it easily kills off a lot of people at a very young age. Some of it can be cured through medicines. If medicines do not work, we have special gadgets called pacemakers, not exactly like the conventional pacemakers, it is called CRTD, etc. If that doesn't work, you have in certain situations, I'll show you a couple of pictures of what's called the artificial heart or the heart pumps. And still today, in about 5% of people who were not responding to any of this, we have one of the miracles of modern medicine, what was a heart transplant. But in India, we have to remember that the higher you go up the ladder, the cost increases and the availability decreases. So this gentleman, one of the great PR personalities of cardiac history, was the redoubtable Christian Barnard. So this is Christian Barnard speaking over here. And Christian Barnard, what he did was very clever. Because as United States, US did all the hard work about the background work, the back-end work about transplantation, the American surgeons in the late 60s were having a very tough time getting the government to agree to it. Very tough time. Most of the work it was done in Stanford and in England by Sir Magdi Yaqub. So both the Americans and British were very conservative. They were not giving clearance for the first human transplant to be done. And Christian Barnard said, fair enough. He was training in Stanford. He said, fair enough. If you can't do it in US, so what? So he quietly shifts from US to South Africa. And in 1967, he performs this miracle of modern medicine, that in the height of an apartheid-ridden South, you talk about peace today. Just imagine, in the height of at the height of apartheid, when a black and a white person wouldn't sit next to one another, in 3rd of December 1967, a black man's heart gets put into a white man's chest as a single first human heart transplant done in the world. And ever since then, people who would normally not live for 24 hours had a chance to live and get 5-year, 10-year survivals. When we in India caught on with heart transplantation over here, I'm a little bit lucky for this evening because there was a great possibility of my team going out to Bhubaneswar early this morning to harvest a heart. There was some problem with the organ, we couldn't go for it. So when we started our heart transplant program, the Indian program, when we show it to people abroad, some of them start having convulsions. Now this is a standard Indigo flight. So there are almost 7 people in the flight. They're all a part of our organ harvesting team. And this chap who's sitting with a box, this box actually needs a ticket. And that ticket is a human heart. So this is a heart, the first heart we harvested in Patna. This is a heart which is coming. The heart needs a ticket. I don't really know what they write in the ticket. If they say so-and-so's heart, or obviously heart doesn't have an ID or a voter ID. But this is the only time you get into the flight without a voter ID, which is the organ sitting, and India is the only country. We do whole of the country does about 400 heart transplants. This year we will probably be nearly 500 a year. And we are the only country who use commercial flights. So when yesterday night we were discussing whether to go off to Bhubaneswar or not, our entire timetable is coordinated by the commercial flights. Not many people can afford. And this over here is a heart reaching the hospital. It's a thrilling moment. It is the thrill we live for. You have these green corridors. We inform the police. The police once did something that was not really funny, but unintendedly, by the time the heart had landed in Kolkata, it was little before 8 o'clock in the evening, and out of their great enthusiasm, they put us on the Ma flyover. And the flyover was chock-a-block, right? So forget about a green corridor. It was red-hot traffic. And we were actually, we made up for it. We were actually, from our calculated time, because from the time a heart comes out, you have 4 hours to put it in somebody's chest, including the operation. So everything has to be done in a matter of 4 hours. So this green corridor got stuck. But yes, it is a challenging exercise. In India, we took about 20 odd years behind United States and all to get started, but the activity is now picking up. So this is a lungs which has just arrived. This is one of our first lung transplants when we did. And all the work that we do, we look for a reward, and that is the reward. I told you the first heart transplant was a black man's heart in a white man's chest, and this was twice I've done it so far. Probably will do it for a 3rd time. I've put a Muslim's heart in a Hindu's chest twice already, right? And I found no difference, honestly. I looked at the blood and other things. I couldn't make out the difference. I have sent some samples to more knowledgeable authorities if they can tell me some group that can come out. So this is a reward.
জিয়াউল আস্তে আস্তে করে, হ্যাঁ টানো, বাহ দারুণ। এখন আগের থেকে ভালো লাগছে একটু?
হ্যাঁ,
হ্যাঁ
ভালো লাগছে,
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে,
আগের থেকে অনেকটাই ভালো লাগছে।
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে। তুমি একটু পা ঝুলিয়ে বসছো?
হ্যাঁ বসছি।
আচ্ছা, আগে যে তোমার শ্বাসকষ্টগুলো হতো সেগুলো একটু কমেছে আগের থেকে এখন?
আগের থেকে অনেকটাই কমে গেছে, প্রায় 60% কমে গেছে।
60% কমে গেছে, আচ্ছা।
যখন আমাকে প্রথমে হার্ট ট্রান্সফারের জন্য বলা হয়েছিল, আমি প্রথমে তো অনেকটাই ভয় পেয়ে গেছিলাম যে আমার তো হয়তো জীবনে আর ফিরে আসতে পারবো না, কিন্তু তবুও ডাক্তারবাবুরা আমাদেরকে অনেক চেষ্টা করার পরেও বললো যে না, এটা তোমার ট্রান্সফার করা ছাড়া আর কোনো উপায় নাই। আগের জীবনটা যেন আমার অন্ধকার হয়ে যাচ্ছিল, কিন্তু আজকে আমি নতুন হার্ট পেয়ে নতুন জীবন আবার ফিরে পেয়েছি।
This is on the day of the Eid, when whole of Murshidabad was literally locked up. So this man weaves the jadi saris for a living. He hardly makes 7,000-8,000 rupees a month. So he was on our waiting list, and when we rang up, so don't think police are only up to their tricks in Khali. Sometimes they do a very good job. And this was one such night, when through the night they put this fellow into one of their vans. They drove through the night, they drove for all of 4.5 hours and reached Calcutta and 2 o'clock in the morning for this guy this is the day after his transplant. So this is something this is the thrill and the kick we get out of all this. Artificial heart is something on which a lot of work is going on, but what we have best right over now is, I'll show you just a second of it. This is called a partial assist. We have 2 chambers. So you cannot really do a good job if both the right and left have failed. It is only when the pumping side is failing, it is like putting in an extra pump inside the heart. This is how it works. This is like an extra pump inside. You have 3 people in Calcutta now who has it. You have about 20,000 implants have happened in the world. In the international registry, you currently have about 1,000 people who have lived more than 3 years with this, right? But the only trouble is you have to walk around with a battery. It's like, because you cannot charge it remotely, you have to walk around with a battery all the time. And 2 years ago, when I was on an international flight, as luck would have it, the chap sat next to me, had an artificial heart, and he had all these batteries and all by the side of him. And there was one chap who had gone to his friend's wedding. He forgot the battery at home. And that was a slight mistake on his side. He had to ring, and the battery was flown in with a helicopter. He said, I'm feeling a bit dizzy. And somebody at the control center asked him that, how long will the battery last for? He said, I've got probably another 45 minutes to go. So they had to fly in a battery. Each battery, in a day, you need 1 recharge. You are given 8 batteries. The little problem in India is, the other name for this operation is called a Mercedes in a chest, because it costs about 80 to 90 lakhs right now. 90% is the cost of the device. So for the last few minutes, I'll share with you where we are as far as the background knowledge of the heart is concerned. We are doing all these things, fancy medicines, fancy operations, transplants, everything. But if we rewind back in time, the first thing, people had a fair idea ever since we became curious about physiology. Medicine really emerged from its shadows by separating itself from religion, because all medicine was controlled by the priests till about 5th century BC, when Hippocrates emerges. So what did people know about the heart? People knew that, look, this is a funny thing, it beats in the chest, and you put a knife through the heart, you are dead. So the only expertise for hundreds and thousands of years we had with us was put a knife, that soldiers were trained where to stick a knife in so that you would die instantly. And some of the cultures, like the Aztecs, I can't even imagine the sight, as an offering in front of their great king or god, would have the heart plucked out of an alive human being. That was the height of the Aztecs' ritual of showing their respect for an emperor. And it took us a very long time. It is the last possible piece of biological puzzle that we solved for ourselves. And everybody tried. Aristotle, the guru of Alexander, Aristotle said many good things, but he really left us with a burden of a lot of misconceptions. He was almost like a politician. And for hundreds of years, we people were made to believe that heart is from where all the nerves take off. Anyway, he did his best. But the problem was, nobody was allowed to think or say otherwise. Then you had a chap called Galen who first thought about that, look, heart, where did the word heart comes from? It comes from the word hearth, which means it's like the center of the room from where you light a fire and generate heat. But one of the initial ideas of human circulation really came from the Islamic scientists. We carry the baggage of a whole lot of misconceptions, about the Islamic civilization, because there is a separate body of work called Islamic science. And if you refer to the 9th to 11th century AD, your centers like Tehran, Damascus, Baghdad, all these were centers. You had Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina is probably one of the, I went to the Ibn Sina hospital in Dhaka once, and I made the great mistake of asking the principal who Ibn Sina was. He fell from the sky. The principal of Ibn Sina hospital never knew who Ibn Sina was. Anyway, I gave him a half an hour lecture on whom Ibn Sina was. He was not one bit impressed with me, at the end of it all. So Ibn Sina, based in Tehran, like your library of Nalanda was burnt, in one of the crusades, it was probably during the first crusade, that the library of Ibn Sina was burnt out, and we lost a lot of knowledge to it. How do you get to know of Aristotle and Socrates and all these people today? Do you think you are reading original Greek? No. Every Greek work was translated into Persian. Persian was retranslated into Latin. Latin was retranslated into Greek. That is how we know the work of the antiquity today, through the work of the Islamic scientists, the Islamic translators. And there was a more clever people who 300 years before the so-called Western science unraveled it, Al-Nafis, based in Damascus, referred to that he was trying to break the puzzle, how heart works and blood goes around the system. But honestly, I have a feeling that scientists, biologists, whoever they were, whatever you call them in that era, they hit a blind wall. They were not getting anywhere in trying to understand circulation. And where scientists fail, artists take over. So when we thought that we were no good, and the scientists and the doctors were really involved in everything else, came the era of Italian Renaissance. And as Leonardo da Vinci was aging, Leonardo da Vinci lived till the age of 78 or 79, I think. And in his whole life, Leonardo only had painted 26 completed canvases. What was he doing the rest of his time? Leonardo never thought of himself as a painter. He thought he was a polymath, a scientist, an inventor. And Leonardo was actually paying people hard cash to exhume dead bodies, and he would sit at home and draw over there. He drew the human skeleton, the outline of the brain. He's got a whole folio of the human heart, but he was doing all that work when we had no idea that how the heart actually worked. He was amazed at the structure without knowing the function. And in order to outcompete Leonardo, you had Michelangelo Buonarroti, you look at his statue of David, in the Accademia in Florence. Every little vein in the hand shows. So there was a competition amongst artists of that era to show up anatomy in its full form. And what was considered impossible was finally broken by William Harvey in 1628. He was a 26-year-old chap doing his PhD thesis in University of Bologna. What is so remarkable about William Harvey? It is like Vivekananda and Rabindranath Tagore. Him and Isaac Newton they were in villages 3 kilometers of one another. And within 3 years of one another, one of them discovers gravitation, the other one of them discovers circulation. So the final piece of puzzle, how the heart works, how blood goes around, was a work of William Harvey. Our curiosity in what causes heart disease, how the world happens, diet, sugar, cholesterol, all these things, like your bell-bottoms and MTVs, was, yes, you have to admit, shaped by American thought, American intellect. And it is 2 events of this century that shaped it. One is, as the whole of United States was cock-a-hoop, celebrating the defeat of Hitler and Second World War, all of a sudden, Franklin Delano Roosevelt dies. Roosevelt literally died in front of everybody else. He had a heart attack and a cerebral thing, one after the other. Nobody could lift a finger. And within a few years of Roosevelt, you had the great Eisenhower of D-Day. Eisenhower has a heart attack in 1955, but Eisenhower was jolly lucky. He was in Colorado that time. He somehow survived it. And that kind of a thing led to a lot of American funding, right? So America is not all about Donald Trump. It is about a whole lot of intellectual equity. So there was a tremendous amount of academic funding into understanding about the cause and what causes this problem. And you had a whole lot of data and trial coming out of America. So what you and I know today in terms of cause of the heart disease literally came out of the preventive lifestyle diseases work and research that happened through the 60s and 70s. A quick word about a few of them before we wind up. And one was, honestly, a whole lot of paranoia is being created in the world today about cholesterol, good cholesterol, blood cholesterol. Look, everything in the human system, I've done a talk on YouTube, and thankfully few lakh people have watched it by this time, putting cholesterol into perspective. Now remember, cholesterol is one of the basic fundamental constituents of the human body. Without cholesterol, no cell would exist. Anything in excess is bad. So when we try to demonize something which is the most essential ingredient of the human body, I think we are making a tremendous oversimplification over there. So what has happened is, you've sampled a few thousand people. Some of them have some elevation of a fraction of cholesterol called LDL cholesterol, and the whole world is chasing LDL cholesterol by bombarding people with these medicines called statins. Now this is really being overdone. Anything in excess is bad. Salt in excess is bad, water in excess is bad, anything in excess is bad. But this oversimplification of putting everything to cholesterol is probably a great trap that is laid for us. And if you are interested, statin industry have now become larger than the arms industry in the whole world. You are selling more statins than missiles right now. We do know a little bit more in detail, and that is these lipids and all, they have different particle size, and something is irritating them, something is annoying them. And what is irritating them is the overall metabolic environment, what is called stress, oxidation, etc., and many of which is related to the presence of a hyperglycemic biology. We have too much of circulating sugar inside the human system. So instead of trying to regulate where we ought to regulate, because look, the human biology was not made to consume refined sugar. When were we manufactured? We were manufactured 120,000 years ago. How old is agriculture? 10,000 years. So your stomach, your intestine, your pancreas, your gallbladder. Basmati refined rice was not known by nature when we were made. White flour was not known by us. Agriculture is to some extent artificial. Every agricultural tract is a replacement of natural flora and fauna. So for millennium altogether, this stressing of our system with a sugar overload is something very fundamental, and we have to be careful about it. We have certain terminologies, I don't want to confuse you and bore you this evening, called insulin resistant, called metabolic syndrome, which is alerting us to the fact that there is more about our internal environment than just oversimplifying everything with LDL cholesterol, statin. That is honestly almost naive. There are certain things that you and I can control for ourselves, at home, at our own place, and one of them is obviously obesity. We are very smart, you are taking pictures with your mobile phone. Just take your body weight once in a while. Know your height. In the same way, every time you file your advance tax, I tell you that the advance tax form should on its top have something called BMI written over there. If every Indian had made it compulsory that the advance tax form will have a column for blood sugar, height and weight, we could do a whole lot of service to ourselves. But be what it may, this is something we can monitor at home. And there are certain measures, Obesity starts when your BMI increases above 25. And that brings a whole lot of problem on us. And we are not helping ourselves by having all this clutter of nutrition and calorie data thrown. It's a very confusing jungle of data and information around us. So if we are to simplify, what do we need? What do we need to see through 124 hours period of activity? Middle age and above. If we have to maintain ourselves, we look for a BMI of 22 to 25. Every time you step into Pantaloons or Marks and Spencer for your next dress and next trousers, look at your waist size. If your waist size is approaching 38 to 40 in men, and it is reaching 35 to 37 in women, be careful. That's the first indicator. We need about 1,500 calories in 24 hours. That's all you need. No matter what your income tax return is, don't try to eat in proportion to the money you earn. You will have problems. You may be a very rich man, but you still have 6 feet of small intestine. You may be a very rich man, your heart will still weigh 300 grams. Your mutual funds makes no difference to your cardiac index. It's exactly the same. So in 24 hours, we need 1,500 calories to 70, if you are very active, 1,700 calories. You need 60 to 70 grams of protein. You need 500 grams of carbohydrate and 60 grams of fat. So once in a while, this is very simple maths. You can sit down at home with your mobiles or whatever and do a stock taking for yourself. You don't need any great work of mathematical genius to get it calculated. And we, as especially Indians or Bengalis, have some unending questions. The first question I get asked anywhere is, "Je Dr. Ravu ki tel khavo?" The first thing you should tell everybody is, be generous with the amount of oil you give, but not with the amount of oil you take in. And the rule of the thumb is about half a liter of oil per head per month. Because oil is a mixture of substances, you have different kinds of amino acids, saturated, etc. Mix and match and use it. And avoid one thing in our daily practice, never refry. Never refry. Refrying is reheating, and with reheating the chemical composition changes. Milk. Milk should be acknowledged to be a very important part of Indian diet. especially considering the fact that half of our population are vegetarians. There is nothing wrong with a vegetarian diet. The only problem with a vegetarian diet is where the protein intake is coming from. That's the only problem with a vegetarian diet. If you are very concerned about the fat that accompanies the milk, you can take what is called a semi-skimmed milk. And eggs, I go on telling people repeatedly, if you don't have any other metabolic problems with you, you are welcome to have 3 to 4 eggs a week. It is the nature's highest and purest source of protein. And when you talk about exercise, don't just say, I exercise. I find this term very, very shattering. What do you mean I exercise? You need to know what exercise and what exercise over what period of time consumes how many calories. Have an idea. If you walk for an hour, you will probably burn 150, around 100 calories. If you run, that doubles. If you cycle, it's even more. I have where I grew up in the Bhavanipur area, you have a very active morning walk community, very active. Everybody heading towards the Victoria Memorial. They go walk for 20 minutes, they burn about 70 calories, come back, have a thick, sugar-infested tea, 3 jalebis, 2 samosas. So every day, I calculated it for so many chaps, every day, each morning walk round, on the pretense of a healthy exercise, they were adding 250 calories every time they went for a morning walk. So when one of them asked me what exercise I should do, I said, stay at home, watch television. Right? Never go out, because everybody going out for a morning walk across those tea shops is actually a metabolic disaster. But, I don't say it over there because the shops threaten to beat me up. Otherwise, I would have gone live with this. What do we mean with a health checkup? All of you want, and the biggest sort of gimmick that people feel very happy. I've been somewhere or the other and done a total body checkup. Well, fine. If they feel happy about it, don't trust it. So, what is advisable right now is, once we are on the wrong side of 45 or 50, get your blood parameters checked twice a year. Very important. Most of the diabetics we have are beyond 40 to 50 years of age. India is a different diabetic population. Do a diet review. Sit down. If you are unhappy doing it, do it with your dietitian. Do it once in 6 months. Have your blood pressure checked at least twice a month. When do you check it? In the morning, when your systems are starting. If you check your blood pressure 10 times a day, you will get 11 different readings. Because that is what blood pressure was supposed to do. It's a variable element. So don't get paranoid about blood pressure. Twice a month, morning. What is the upper figure? You want to remember one figure? The upper figure is 140. Don't let your upper blood pressure go much above 140. Body weight at least once a month. If you can twice a month, well and good. Things like an ECG and an echocardiogram needs to be checked at least once a year. Once you are in the zone of 45 to 50. And shame that Dr. Sharma didn't, otherwise he would have given me a prize. I ask everybody who is 50, 55 and above to get a CT scan of the heart done every 4 to 5 years. As per the technology available to us today, never ever bet on the intelligence of your doctor, because that species of an intelligent doctor hasn't been discovered yet. When it is discovered, I'll let you know. Okay? So it does not matter. It does not matter what a doctor thinks. Only one thing matters, what a doctor sees. As long as he's clever enough to interpret that picture. So get it done once a year. And having done all that, with little bit of understanding that we have today, are we getting any better? Do we have a little bit of inner peace to say that the situation surrounding us has improved a little bit? Well, without a doubt, and of course we have. So if you consider, people celebrate Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, fantastic. So remember, all these people you get angry with, doctors, physicians, surgeons, health workers, etc., you give us the highest social decorations possible. For every year you have been independent, Indian healthcare has given you 6 more months of life. We are the only country in the world who, in a matter of 75 years, have literally doubled their life expectancy from 37 years. I'll show you what Google thinks today. So this is somewhere, we are getting somewhere with it. And we know that many of the curves are still attaining its peak. All of us put together. It is not the work of the doctors itself, by no means. Each and every healthcare worker, the ASHA worker, the Anganwadi worker, the primary health immunizer, the health center, everybody has its stake in the game. And what we thought in my lifetime, being a little bit interested in community medicine and health, we never thought that we are going to see this. I'm not really that sold on the fact whether you are the 5th biggest economy or not. But we in our lifetimes never ever thought that the life expectancy of the Indians would hit 70.15 years, and that is as per the modern god of today, Google, right? So today, India has been one of the first developing post-colonial countries in whom the life expectancy has crossed 70 years. What is you all want to know what America is doing. America's life expectancy is 76 years, not that much more. So what separates us from an average American life expectancy today is about 6 years. The only people who are far ahead of us is Japan, who stands at 82 years. And if you really want to live the longest, go and live in the Japanese island of Okinawa, where the average expectancy is 94 years. So we have gone somewhere. So all this activity, which is to do with prevention, which is to do with understanding, and which is to do with treatment, has actually led us somewhere. But having said that, the real challenge for all of us, as a part of the community and as a part of the workforce who's involved in treating these diseases, I think we cannot have any kind of complacency. India has this burning statistic of 150,000 heart attacks every night, with 25,000 of them perishing. That is the challenge in front of us, where this upward trend in lifestyle-oriented diseases has to be put under control. And the way things will shape up, I think by the year 2030, we definitely expect to see a downtrend in this curve. Many countries in the world have done it. And if we keep our focus on diabetes, on metabolism, on healthcare, on prevention, then I think all of us put together will get there. And to end, thank you for your time and attention. And whenever we finish, we have to finish with the words of Robert Frost and say that the woods were lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and all of us have miles to go before we sleep. Thank you.